Ahoy! Mr. Thompson here with a science video lesson, starting a new series on evolution. Introduction today, and we will be talking about what evolution is as a general topic, classification, and then also biodiversity. So it's actually kind of a prelude to evolution, not so much about how evolution works, but getting some concepts down so that we can then discuss what evolution is. So let's get into it. Okay. So as an overall concept, a thing, evolution is a theory that proposes an explanation to the diversity of living things on Earth. So why are there, or how did there come to be so many different kinds of living things on Earth? Evolution gives us a theory as to explain how that is and how that's come to be. One of the main things about evolution is it holds that all living things have descended from a common ancestor. So if you think about your ancestors, your grandma or grandpa or something like that, that's your ancestor, and if you go further and further back, and if you go back far enough, every single living thing on the earth, not just people, but plants, animals, all kinds of different living things, all came from one single ancestor millions and millions of years ago. We're not going to, like I said, we're not going to talk a lot about how evolution works. We're not going to talk at all, really, except for just now, about how evolution works. I'll just say that the mechanism that by which we believe evolution works is natural selection. There will be a whole nother video on just natural selection, so you can look forward to that. For now, let's talk about this diversity, right? What does this diversity look like? So what are the ways that we classify, what are the ways that we define all the different types of living things in the earth? And basically, there are 5 kingdoms, what we call kingdoms, and we'll start with plants and animals. That's 2. We'll talk about the next 3 in a minute. But the reason I want to talk about plants and animals is that these 2, originally, this is what people thought. Everything that lives is either a plant or an animal. And that highlights for us the concept that classification, what we're about to talk about here, what we're talking about, is a convention. It's a human convention. We've made it up. It's not like some pre-existing thing. It's just when we look around at the different kinds of living things, we classify them in this way. We found this the most useful. There very well may be a more useful way to classify life that we discover in the future as we learn and discover new things. And so as it says here, the classification can change. It changed from when it was just these 2 things to now the 5 things. So fungus, such as mushrooms, that's another kind of life. Fungus are neither plant nor animal. They don't do all the things that plants do. They do some things that plants do, right? They grow in the ground, but they're different enough that we put them in a whole nother kingdom. And they're obviously not animals. There's 2 more, the protists and the prokaryotes. Okay, and protists and prokaryotes are all like really little small stuff, so such as bacteria. Okay, I'm not going to go into like exactly what they are. So saying they're like bacteria is a little oversimplifying, but it's the kind of idea. They're little single cell, really small, not just single cell, but really small stuff that you need a microscope to look at. Okay, now the first 4 of these kingdoms are what we call eukaryotic. Okay, that means that the cells within these things have a nucleus. Okay, so when you look at the cell under a microscope, the nucleus will be one little particular part. And prokaryotes, they do not have a nucleus. Okay, so within the cell of the organism, the DNA or chromosomes or whatever there is just kind of floats around willy-nilly in the cell. Whereas these 5, the plants, animals, fungus, and protists, they all have cells that have nuclei, right? Each cell has a nucleus. Now, the kingdoms is sort of maybe the most broad categorizing, the broadest classification of animals. There are actually a lot more ways we classify animals. So within kingdoms, there are a phylum. Within phylum, there is class. Within class, there is order. Within order, there is family. Within family, there is genus, and within genus, there is, get out of the way here, species, right? Now, species is probably what we're probably familiar with the ideas of the kingdoms that I laid out there before, the plants, animals, fungus, and stuff. we're probably pretty familiar with species, right? All this other stuff is just other ways that we classify living things. And we're not going to get into exactly what each of these is. It's just good to know these are classifications and categories that exist. And so if you run up against these kinds of things, you might learn about them more in the future or something like that. These classifications are based on genetic and other similarities. So we look at the similarities, whether it's physical characteristics or, all kinds of other things, but definitely also the genetic similarities and differences within and between all of these different groups, right? Now, I'll just say quickly about genus and species. These two are what we tend to refer to as like the scientific name of an organism. So, for example, humans are Homo sapiens, right? Homo is the genus, or also known as the generic name of the species, and then the species is the specific. So there are there have been other kinds of Homo organisms. So, in the past, they're extinct. They no longer, Homo sapiens are the only, species in our genus. But that's the idea. So the scientific name tends to come from the genus and the species. All right. Now, biodiversity. We talked about the diversity of life on Earth, and there's just a few terms and things to sort of sort out here when it comes to biodiversity. So biodiversity is variation within living things. So the differences between different things. There can be variation within a species. So the differences from one individual in a species to another, or one group within a species to another. And there can be variation between species in, say, an ecosystem, right? So what are the different species and things like that living in an ecosystem? And all this stuff is important when it comes to evolution. Biodiversity in general is caused by mutations. Okay, so mutations are changes within the genetic code in an organism from one generation to the next. So when one generation of a species has children, and then they have children, and they have children, there are changes that can happen to the genetic code that make changes that have changes in the outcome of how those species sort of are, what their characteristics are, maybe what they look like, how they behave, that kind of thing. I just realized I forgot to put in the notes, but these mutations can occur during meiosis. So when the gametes are being produced and the sex cells are being produced, right, for reproduction. And the mutations can also happen in fertilization. So when the egg and sperm meet, things can happen that cause, the way that those combine can cause mutations and variations as well. Okay, so mutations can happen during meiosis and during fertilization. Adaptations are a variation that increases the chance of a species' survival. So this is what it's all about, and this is getting towards that whole natural selection thing, that kind of idea that we'll cover in detail later. But adaptations are changes that are good changes, right? They help a species survive and maybe beat out competition or whatever. Maybe just live longer or whatever, more successful in passing on their genes and reproducing and stuff like that. Genetic drift is when a population as a whole has lots of variations, adaptations, and changes going on in the population, and over time they might look significantly different than how they looked before, right? Or there might be different things as a population, so not just one individual to the next. It's sort of looking at the big picture of a population and how the characteristics of that group, that species, has changed over time, right? Because some changes will happen in multiple individuals and things like that, and the whole organism, the whole species can change over time. All right, that's our introductory video on evolution. So more videos coming in the future, and I guess I'll see you later.